The sky hung heavy and dark over the charred remains of the wagon, smoke curling like ghostly fingers into the cold morning air. The scent of burned wood and earth clung to everything bitter and raw. A girl knelt on the scorched ground, her small hands trembling as they sifted through the ashes. Her dress was torn and singed, clinging to her thin frame. Her hair, black as night, fell over her face, hiding the tears streaking her dirt-smudged cheeks. She rocked back and forth, whispering words no one could hear, words that belonged to a family already swallowed by the cruel hands of fate. "My family's gone," she sobbed, voice breaking, as if the words themselves were too heavy to bear. The girl's name was Winona, a Modoc child of 10 winters, and she had already known more sorrow than most lives could hold. Her parents, her little brother, all lost to the fire that had taken their wagon and their dreams of a new life in the wide, unforgiving West. She had watched the flames climb, had smelled the smoke, had screamed for help that never came, and now she was alone, with only the wind as a companion. Whipping across the plains and carrying the faint cry of distant coyotes, somewhere beyond, the haze of smoke and shattered dreams, the sound of hooves echoed across the rolling hills. A lone cowboy rode fast, hat pulled low against the rain that had begun to fall, heavy drops drumming the earth with urgent rhythm. His horse skidded on slick mud, nostrils flaring, muscles straining against the pull of urgency. He had been tracking the fire's smoke for miles, drawn not by chance, but by instinct. And when he crested a small rise, he saw her, this fragile figure hunched over the blackened remains of the wagon. The cowboy's name was Silas, a man who had walked through enough storms both of earth and of life to know when a soul needed saving. He slowed his horse, eyes scanning the devastation, heart tightening as he took in the small girl trembling alone. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent understanding born from shared griefs that words could not carry. Rain soaked his worn coat, clinging to his frame like a second skin. Yet he did not hesitate. He dismounted, boots sinking into the sodden ground, and moved toward her, careful and deliberate, a presence meant to anchor her in the chaos around her. Winona looked up at him through the strands of wet hair plastered to her face. Her eyes, dark and wide, reflected both fear and disbelief. It had been hours since anyone had been near her, hours since a voice other than her own had filled the empty air. She flinched, instinctively shrinking back, but the cowboy's voice was low and steady, carrying over the patter of rain. "I'm here," he said, simple words that held a weight she could almost feel pressing against her chest. Tears mixed with the rain as she tried to speak, but the sound caught in her throat. Silas knelt slowly, careful not to startle her further, letting his hands rest lightly on the ground near hers. "It's all right," he said, voice calm but firm. "You're not alone anymore. I won't leave." For a long moment, neither moved. The fire had taken everything familiar from her, leaving only fear and cold. But in the shadow of loss, something fragile and hesitant began to stir a flicker of trust. A faint hope that someone, perhaps for the first time since the blaze, might be there to shield her from the merciless world outside. Silas scanned the wreckage, noting the scattered belongings, the faint footprints in the mud, the traces of smoke rising from blackened wood. He understood the story without needing to hear it fully. A family lost, a girl abandoned by circumstance, a West that showed no mercy. And yet, despite the ruin around them, he saw resilience in her posture, however slight, and knew that within that small, grieving frame lay a strength she might not yet recognize. The rain thickened, drumming harder against the scorched earth, and the wind seemed to push them closer, as if urging connection amid the desolation. Silas gently extended a hand, a simple gesture loaded with promise. Winona hesitated, glancing between the ashes of her past and the stranger offering her something resembling safety. Finally, with trembling resolve, she let him lift her, her small body pressed against his chest, soaked and shivering. The warmth of human contact was a strange comfort, unfamiliar but welcome, as he carried her away from the smoldering wagon, her tears soaked into his coat, leaving dark streaks against the worn fabric. He did not speak, letting silence serve as shield and balm, letting the rhythm of the horse's hooves against the mud become a steady heartbeat against the chaos they had left behind. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderclap rolled over the hills, and the sky opened in a torrent, but neither faltered. Winona clung tightly, fear mingling with awe, as she looked up at Silas. Where are we going?" she asked, voice barely audible over the storm. Silas did not answer immediately. Instead, he guided the horse down a narrow trail, avoiding deep ruts and jagged rocks, his mind turning over possibilities and dangers alike. "Somewhere safe," he finally said, voice steady. "Somewhere you can rest. We'll figure out the rest together." The rain blurred the landscape into shades of gray and brown, and for a moment, Winona let herself sink into the rhythm of the ride, the tension in her small body easing slightly. Yet even as she clung to him, her mind lingered on the flames, on the echo of her family's cries, on the lingering question of how everything could have ended so fast. The West was a harsh teacher. It demanded lessons in survival few were ready to learn. Silas knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The plains were unforgiving and shelter was scarce. They would face wolves, hunger, the cold nights that cut to the bone. But he also knew that hope, however fragile, had a stubborn way of taking root when two lives converged against a shared backdrop of loss. And in that shared space, perhaps Winona could find not just safety, but a chance to grow, to reclaim some piece of the life she had lost. As the first rays of the rising sun began to pierce the storm clouds, casting a muted glow over the wet earth, Silas's mind flicked to the questions that needed answers. Who else had survived the fire? Was anyone else out there searching? Or was she truly alone? Most pressing of all, how could he protect this girl, whose sorrow was as deep as the river valleys, and whose spirit, though broken, still held the stubborn pulse of life? Winona's eyes, wide and dark, reflected both fear and curiosity, mirroring the uncertainty of the road ahead. She could sense, in some unspoken way, that this man meant to stand between her and the world's cruelty. And yet, the unknown stretched before them like the endless prairie. The rain continued. It's relentless, washing away the traces of the fire, but not the memory of it. And as Silas guided the horse forward, the smoke from the burned wagon lingering behind them like a specter of the past, a quiet thought settled in his mind. Some journeys began with tragedy, and some lives were reshaped in the crucible of loss. But the story was only beginning, and already it promised trials that would test courage, forge unlikely bonds, and reveal the strength hidden in the most vulnerable hearts. For Winona, carried against the storm, the world had shrunk to the pulse of the horse beneath her, the warmth of Silas's coat, and the whispered promise of safety. And yet somewhere on the horizon, dark shapes and dangers awaited, threats she could not yet see. The West was wide and wild. It had lessons still to teach, and as the first distant howl of a coyote echoed across the hills, Silas tightened. His hold whispered again, "I'm here," and pressed forward. Both of them walking a path of uncertainty, grief, and fragile hope, leaving behind the ashes of a family and the charred remnants of a past that refused to let go. The storm was far from over, and neither of them knew what the next day would bring. But in the quiet, drenched moments between rain and thunder, a bond had begun, one born of tragedy, strengthened by trust, and destined to carry them through the uncharted trials of the West. The wagon burned behind them, but a new story, raw and unshaped, waited to be written. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle by the time Silas led the horse into a narrow canyon flanked by jagged rock and dark pines. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, sharp and clean after the storm. Winona pressed closer, her small hands clutching the lapels of his coat, still trembling but quieter now. She did not speak, though her eyes wandered over the unfamiliar landscape, taking in every shadow, every twist of the path, as if memorizing where safety might hide. Silas rode slowly, listening to the sound of water trickling over stones and the occasional rustle of leaves. He knew that storms could wash away not only roads but also the tracks of danger, leaving surprises around every bend. The West was patient but not forgiving, and every canyon, creek, and ridge carried a story of those who had fallen to its cruelty. He had heard them all: families lost to fire, travelers ambushed by desperate outlaws, wanderers swallowed by harsh winters. But he had also seen those who survived, whose courage burned brighter than any fire. And he believed that Winona, small and fragile though she seemed, carried that same ember. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked gently, glancing at her from under his hat. The brim was wet, water dripping from it in slow beads. "Winona," she whispered, her voice tight but clear. "It means the firstborn daughter." She hesitated, then added, "My family. My father, mother, little brother, they're gone." Silas nodded, saying nothing at first. He had no words that could truly fix the emptiness that tragedy had carved into her heart. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the damp air, and for a brief moment, the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Silas studied the trees, listening for anything unusual, his instincts honed by years of traveling alone through untamed lands. There was more than just nature lurking. Here he could feel it. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the wind carried whispers that were not the wind's own. Bandits, scavengers, or something else, he could not yet tell. But he knew that nothing would harm Winona while he was near. Night began to settle slowly, and the meadow darkened under a blanket of clouds. Silas secured the horse near the fire, tying it loosely to a tree, and helped Winona find a place on the soft moss to rest. She leaned against him reluctantly, her body small but clinging, and for the first time, allowed herself to relax enough to drift into uneasy sleep. He watched over her, firelight reflecting in his eyes, mind turning over the possibilities that lay ahead. The West did not forgive mistakes, and every decision carried weight. The burned wagon, the fire, the loss of her family, it was only the beginning. Danger would follow them, whether in the form of the wilderness, desperate men, or the lingering memory of what she had lost. But he also knew that together they had a chance, however slim, to survive and to confront whatever came next. Silas's thoughts drifted to the map of the region, carried in his head, hidden valleys, abandoned cabins, rivers that could sustain life, trails that led to towns or settlements. They would need supplies, and Winona would need to learn how to navigate, to listen to the land. Trust instincts she had not yet known she possessed. She was small, but she had survived fire. That alone made her remarkable. As the night deepened, strange sounds rose from the forested edges of the canyon, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of underbrush, a low growl that might have been a wolf, or something else entirely. Silas's hand never left the makeshift weapon he had fashioned from a sturdy branch, ready for anything. Winona stirred, eyes opening wide in the darkness. "What is that?" she whispered. "Nothing that can touch us if we stay alert," he answered, tone calm, though his senses were sharpened. "The West has many voices at night. Some are warnings. Some are just shadows. We'll learn the difference." Winona nodded, shivering not just from the cold, but from the tension in the air. She could feel that their journey was only beginning, and that whatever lay ahead would demand courage she had not yet fully discovered. The fire flickered, sending long shadows dancing across the canyon walls, and the wind carried a faint, uneasy howl from far away. Silas tightened his hold on his weapon, eyes scanning, and whispered again, "I'm here. No matter what comes, you won't face it alone." Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, movement stirred too quick for an animal, too deliberate for the wind. Silas felt it before he saw it, a presence, watching, waiting, perhaps hungry for weakness. He did not panic. He had survived this land for a reason, but he knew that by morning the real test would begin, and the night would not be their only challenge. Winona, huddled against him, shivered, feeling both fear and the strange spark of hope. She did not yet understand the world she had entered, nor the trials it would demand. But as dawn approached, she clung to the one certainty she could hold. Silas was here, and together. They might yet face whatever darkness the West had in store. The canyon was silent once more, save for the crackle of the dying fire. Yet in that silence, tension lingered, thick as the mist rising from the wet earth, and both knew that the story was far from over. The first light of morning seeped over the canyon walls, pale and weak, painting the wet meadow in muted shades of gray and brown. Winona stirred, blinking against the dim light, and realized the fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. She shivered and pulled Silas's coat tighter around her. The world felt different in daylight, not less dangerous, only sharper. Every shadow seemed to hold a question. Every rustle in the underbrush a potential threat. Silas had already risen, checking the horse and the trail ahead. His eyes were steady, scanning the surrounding cliffs and trees for signs of trouble. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low and careful. "Staying here too long is dangerous. The West doesn't wait for anyone, and neither do those who might follow the fire's trail." Winona nodded, rising reluctantly. Her legs were stiff, muscles sore from the night spent half sleeping on the moss. But she trusted Silas, not just because he had saved her, but because she felt something deeper, a presence that promised he would carry her through what she could not yet face alone. "Where will we go?" she asked, voice small. "There's a ridge not far from here," Silas answered. "High ground, hidden from the main trails. We can rest there, see the land, and plan our next steps. But we move carefully. Keep your eyes open." The path through the canyon was slick with mud, and the stream that ran through it had risen overnight. Silas guided the horse slowly, carefully picking a route that avoided hidden holes and unstable rocks. Winona clung to him, soaked and shivering but silent. She had learned that silence sometimes spoke louder than words, and the quiet between them felt safe, like a fragile shield against the world outside. As they emerged from the canyon, the land opened into rolling hills, golden grass slick with rain. Silas stopped the horse at a rise, scanning the horizon. Smoke rose faintly from a distant ridge, curling thin and black against the morning sky. His brow tightened. "Someone's been here recently," he murmured. "Could be travelers, could be trouble." Winona's heart pounded. She had barely survived the fire, barely escaped the ruins of her family's life, and already danger seemed to shadow them. "Will they hurt us?" she asked, voice trembling. Silas did not answer immediately. He squatted beside her, letting her lean against him. "Not if we're careful," he said finally. "But sometimes the West tests those who least expect it. You've survived what most wouldn't even face. That means you're stronger than you think. But we need to be smart." The smoke in the distance began to shift, the wind carrying its faint acrid scent. Silas rose, scanning the hills with sharp eyes. "We're not alone," he said. "We'll skirt around them for now. Keep low. Move quietly." Nona tightened her grip on the horse, muscles tense. She had seen death once already, had felt its smoke and heat. And now she realized survival was not just about escaping the obvious dangers. It was about sensing the hidden ones, about reading the land and the people who traveled it. They moved carefully, winding through gullies and tall grass, each step measured, every sound amplified in their ears. Silas's mind ran through possibilities: bandits scavenging after the fire, travelers searching for supplies, or worse. He had seen greed and desperation twist people into monsters in the West, and he could not underestimate anyone. As they neared the ridge, faint voice reached them over the wind, hoarse and pleading. Silas froze, signaling Winona to stay low. He moved forward quietly, scanning the hilltops and valleys. There, half hidden behind a rock formation, was another figure, a man, kneeling, head bowed, hands clutching his side. His clothes were torn, smeared with mud and blood, and he seemed barely alive. Silas studied him for a moment. "Could be injured. Or a trap," he muttered. He glanced at Winona, who stared wide-eyed. "We can't ignore him," he said finally. "But we stay alert. Watch me." He moved closer, hand resting on the hilt of a knife, eyes scanning for anything that could betray danger. The man lifted his head slightly, revealing a gaunt face, sunken eyes, and a desperate expression. "Help," he croaked, voice weak. Silas crouched low. "We'll help," he said. "But you stay still. Move too fast, and you might get hurt or worse." Winona watched him intently, fascinated by the careful balance of caution and compassion. She had never seen someone navigate danger with such quiet authority. It made her feel safer, but also aware that the West was a place where trust had to be earned slowly. Every step measured against the unknown. As Silas knelt beside the injured man, He noticed a faint emblem on the man's torn jacket, a symbol of a small settlement not far from here. That could mean food, shelter, or danger, depending on who controlled it. The man's hand twitched, and Silas caught it, steadying him. "Can you walk?" he asked. I think so," the man whispered, pain flickering across his features. "Bandits attacked. Took the others." Silas's jaw tightened. Bandits were a constant threat in these lands, especially after a storm when travelers were vulnerable. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he said. "But you need to tell me everything's fast." Winona edged closer, curiosity mixed with caution. She had learned that danger came in many forms, and sometimes the smallest choices determined life or death. Silas's attention was fully on the man, yet he remained aware of every sound. Every movement around them. The man spoke slowly, voice strained, describing a small convoy of travelers attacked in the night, men with guns and knives taking supplies and leaving destruction behind. He mentioned a hidden trail, a rough path through the hills that might lead them to shelter, but also warned of other dangers. People who preyed on the weak and desperate. Silas absorbed the information, weighing risks and planning the next move. "We move carefully," he said. "Follow me and don't stray. There's a place ahead where we can rest and figure out the next steps." Winona followed silently, the tension in her small body mirrored in the cautious movements of the injured man. The trio wound through the hills, the grass slick under their feet, shadows shifting with the sun's rising. Every sound, the call of a distant bird, the rustle of leaves, made them pause. Every ridge might hide a threat, every hollow a trap. As they approached a narrow gorge that could conceal them from distant watchers, Silas signaled for a stop. He scanned the terrain, noting faint tracks that suggested others had passed through recently. Not bandits, he realized, but something else, perhaps hunters, perhaps wanderers with unknown intentions. The land itself seemed alive with tension, holding secrets that demanded attention. Winona felt her heart race. Every step, every moment, was a test. The west was vast and unpredictable, and danger could emerge from the earth, the sky, or human hands. Yet alongside fear, she felt a strange determination, a quiet strength that Silas had spoken of. She would survive if only to honor the family she had lost, if only to keep moving forward despite the shadowed horizon. Silas glanced at her, reading the mix of fear and resolve in her eyes. "Stay close," he whispered. "The West doesn't forgive mistakes, but it rewards those who learn fast." God. The injured man stumbled, and Silas caught him, steadying both him and Winona. "We're almost there," he said, though he knew that almost in the West could stretch into hours of danger. The gorge ahead might hide shelter, but it could also hide predators, human or otherwise. He would not take chances. Not with Winona, not with anyone who relied on him. The tension hung thick in the air as they moved, the sun climbing higher but failing to chase away the shadows. Silas's mind raced with possibilities, each step forward a negotiation with fate. Bandits, wild animals, the treacherous land itself fall, could strike without warning. And yet amidst the uncertainty, he felt a quiet pulse of hope. Together, they could survive. Together, they could face the West and the trials it demanded. Winona, walking close, felt it too, a fragile spark of courage in a world that had tried to crush her spirit. She clutched Silas's hand instinctively, seeking connection, seeking reassurance. And as the gorge widened before them, dark and uncertain, she realized that this was more than survival. It was a beginning, but one she knew would demand every ounce of strength she could summon, and somewhere beyond the next bend, hidden in shadow, the West waited, patient and relentless. Ready to test them both, the gorge stretched before them like a dark throat, narrow and unforgiving, with jagged rocks pressing close on either side. Silas led the way, his hand steady on the hilt of his knife, eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. The injured man followed close behind, each step slow and careful. While Winona's small hand clutched Silas's coat, her eyes wide and alert. Every sound, the drip of water from the rocks, the snap of a twig underfoot, the distant call of a bird felt magnified. Every second a test of patience and awareness. The morning had grown heavier with tension. The ridge they had hoped to reach now felt miles away, and the land itself seemed to close in around them. Silas's mind ran through every possibility. Bandits hidden along the narrow path, predators stalking from the cliffs, even the treacherous footing that could send one of them tumbling into the sharp rocks below. He had faced danger before, but the stakes had never been so personal. Winona's life, fragile and precious, was tied to his vigilance, and he could not afford to falter. Winona's breath came in quiet gasps, part from exertion and part from fear. The fire and smoke of her past haunted her still, and each unfamiliar sound made her flinch. Yet there was a growing determination in her, small but fierce, to survive. She had already lost everything she loved, and she refused to lose herself, not while Silas guided her. The small flame of hope he had sparked within her began to burn brighter. Even as shadows pressed close, they rounded a bend in the gorge and Silas froze. Ahead, a cluster of rocks formed a natural arch, half hidden by shadows. Beneath it lay faint footprints pressed into the mud. They were fresh to ignore. His eyes narrowed, scanning the surrounding cliffs for any sign of movement. "Stay quiet," he whispered, pressing Winona close. The injured man stumbled slightly, but Silas steadied him with a firm hand. From the shadows, a sudden rustle broke the quiet. Silas crouched low, pulling Winona behind a boulder, knife ready. A pair of figures emerged, ragged and cautious, moving slowly through the gorge. Their eyes flicked to every shadow, every glint of the morning sun, off wet stone. Silas recognized them instantly. Bandits, likely the same ones who had attacked the convoy described by the injured man. Their faces were hard, eyes empty of mercy, hands twitching near weapons. Winona's grip tightened, fear and adrenaline coiling inside her. She had never been this close to men who meant harm, and the fire in her chest reminded her of all she had survived. Silas crouched low, whispering instructions. "We move when they turn. One wrong step, and they'll see us. Stay silent, stay close." The bandits moved nearer, boots squelching in the mud. One of them kicked at the ground, a low chuckle escaping his lips. Silas counted their steps, timing his movements carefully. The gorge was narrow. If they were spotted, there would be nowhere to run. Every second stretched into eternity as he calculated the safest path, the right moment to strike or to flee. Winona's pulse raced. Her small body pressed against the cold rock, but she did not flinch. She watched Silas, learning from him, trusting his instinct and presence. The injured man murmured, "They'll kill us. If they find us?" Silas's jaw tightened, but he gave a firm, silent nod to show he understood. Survival depended on control, patience, and courage. And both he and Winona clung to that truth. A sudden movement of birds startled from a tree caused one bandit to glance upward. Silas seized the moment, signaling Winona to move. They edged along a narrow ledge, every muscle tense, breath caught in silent anticipation. The bandits' attention returned to the trail ahead. The trio pressed forward, moving closer to the narrow arch that might provide cover. But danger is rarely so easily evaded. A snap of a twig betrayed them. One bandit spun, eyes narrowing, lips curling into a sneer. "There," he barked, reaching for his gun. Silas's instincts snapped into action. He grabbed Winona, ducking low, and lunged for cover behind a boulder. Bullets spattered the rocks around them, sparks flying as stones shattered under the force. The injured man cried out, pain flashing across his face as he stumbled, and Silas caught him before he fell. Winona's heart raced, fear and exhilaration tangled together. This was no longer a story of quiet survival. It was life and death, raw and immediate. The sound of gunfire echoed through the gorge, amplifying the tension. Each shot a reminder that the West showed no mercy. Silas held Winona close, whispering, "Stay down. Trust me. We get through this together." The bandits moved closer, cautious now, aware that something was hiding in the shadows. Silas scanned the terrain, eyes sharp, calculating every angle. A narrow ledge above offered a potential escape route, but it was risky. One slip, One misstep, and they could all fall. He glanced at Winona, reading the mix of fear and determination in her eyes. She nodded ever so slightly, signaling her trust. That trust, fragile but absolute, fueled his resolve. Suddenly, a sharp cry echoed from the gorge's far side. Another bandit, separated from the group, had discovered evidence of their presence. Silas acted quickly, using a combination of shadow and speed to move them toward the ledge. Rocks tumbled behind them as bullets cut through the air, and the sound of pounding hooves, or was it their imagination, made every second stretch unbearably long. Winona's hands were ice-cold, but her grip on Silas remained firm. She had survived fire, loss, and now bullets. Her fear was sharp, but her will to survive was sharper. Every step she took under Silas's guidance felt like a statement. She would not be a victim of the West. Not now, not ever. They reached the ledge, precarious and slick with rain. Silas helped the injured man first, steadying him against the rock wall. Then he lifted Winona, holding her against his chest as he climbed. The bandits shouted, frustrated, their voices echoing through the gorge. Silas could feel Winona's heart beating against his chest, a rapid, fragile rhythm that reminded him what he was fighting for. Above them, the ledge widened slightly, offering temporary refuge. Silas crouched low, scanning the gorge below. The bandits were regrouping, voices sharp, searching, calculating. Time was short. Every second spent here increased the risk of discovery, but retreating the way they had come was impossible. He needed a plan, and fast. Winona watched him, every movement deliberate, every glance measured. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes. This was not a man who acted recklessly. He moved with purpose, with the knowledge that a single mistake could mean death. And yet, despite the danger, despite the fear, she felt something she had not felt in days. Hope. The injured man coughed weakly, groaning as he struggled to remain upright. Silas knelt beside him, whispering instructions to keep him steady. "We hold here until night," he said. "Then we move when the shadows hide us. Stay quiet, stay low, and trust me." Winona's eyes wandered across the gorge, taking in every shadow, every potential threat. She could feel the west pressing in, alive and watchful, every rock and tree a part of a landscape that demanded respect. The bandits below were patient, organized, dangerous, but so was Silas, and she was learning that strength often came not from size or power, but from courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act when the moment demanded it. As the hours stretched, the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light across the canyon floor. The bandits moved cautiously, checking every nook and shadow, their frustration growing. Silas kept the trio low, watching, waiting, knowing that the right moment to act was approaching. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready for action. Every sense alert to the faintest sound. Winona shivered, exhausted but alert, her mind replaying the fire, the loss and the terror they now faced. And yet she clung to Silas, the warmth of his presence a tether to safety and hope. The West was cruel, but she realized that with him, survival and perhaps even a chance at something more was possible above. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of smoke from the distant ridge. Silas's eyes narrowed. Reinforcements? Another threat? He did not know, but he did not hesitate. Every choice, every movement now mattered. The next few moments would define their path. He would not fail them. Winona's small hand found his, gripping tightly, and he gave a faint nod. Together, they crouched on the ledge, waiting, listening, and preparing for whatever the West would throw at them next. The gorge below seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, every shadow a question, every movement a potential answer, and in that tense, fragile silence, the world seemed to pause, waiting for the storm of events that would come next, the moment that would test courage, resolve, and the bond forming between a cowboy and a Modoc girl who had survived more than most could bear. The climax was near, the danger reaching its peak, and the story held its breath, ready to unfold into the trials that would decide if hope could survive the relentless West. Silas waited on the ledge, heart pounding, every sense alert, as the bandits below argued and moved in confusion. Their voices, sharp and frustrated, echoed through the gorge, but their attention was divided. One had gone to check the distant trail. Another had paused at the arch of rocks. For the first time, Silas saw an opening. He leaned close to Winona, whispering, "We move now. Stay close, don't look down, and trust me." Winona's hands gripped his coat tightly, nails digging into the soaked fabric. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but she nodded. Despite the fear, there was a spark inside her, a quiet determination that had grown stronger since Silas first lifted her from the ashes. She was not a helpless child anymore. She was a survivor, ready to step into a new chapter of life, careful and deliberate. Silas guided them along the narrow ledge, moving silently as shadows of bandits passed below. Every step was measured, every glance over the edge calculated. The injured man stumbled once, groaning, and Silas steadied him with a firm arm. "Almost there," he murmured. "Keep moving. One step at a time." The ledge opened onto a small plateau, hidden by a grove of trees that bent in the wind. Silas exhaled, relieved, though he did not let his guard down. They were not safe yet, but the immediate danger had passed. The plateau offered not just cover, but also a vantage point to survey the land and plan the next move. Winona sank to the ground, exhausted. But a small smile broke through her grime-streaked face. "You did it," Silas said softly, kneeling beside her. "You held on. You're stronger than you realize." Her dark eyes met his, wide and luminous. I couldn't have without you," she admitted. "You saved me." "I didn't save you," he corrected gently. "You saved yourself. I just helped guide you." His voice carried a quiet pride, not boastful but honest. "And you will keep saving yourself, Winona. Every day." The injured man, leaning against a tree, nodded weakly. I owe you my life too," he said. "I didn't think anyone would come. I was sure they would leave me. Like so many others?" Silas shook his head. "No one gets left behind. Not while I can help it." The plateau offered a moment of reprieve. The air was crisp and smelled of wet pine, carrying the faint sound of the distant stream. Silas assessed the terrain, noting hidden trails, potential water sources, and areas where danger might be lurking. He knew the West would not be gentle, but he also knew that they had survived the most immediate threat. That was the first step toward a new beginning. Winona sat quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. For the first time since the fire, she felt the possibility of the future. Her family was gone, but she could survive. She could grow. And she could live a life shaped not by tragedy alone, but by courage, determination, and hope. Silas noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her shoulders straightened slightly, and the faint glimmer of resolve in her gaze. Hours passed as they rested. And Silas shared what little food they had, water from a nearby stream, and warmth from a carefully constructed fire. The injured man managed to stand, leaning heavily on a makeshift staff, his gratitude evident in every motion. They spoke little, but the quiet bond between them grew, a connection forged in danger and shared survival. As evening approached, Silas guided them down a hidden trail that led to a small cabin, abandoned but intact. The roof had minor leaks, and the windows were cracked, but it offered shelter from the wind and rain. Winona's eyes widened when she saw it. "A home," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Silas said softly. "For now it will be enough. We'll make it safe, warm, and strong. And from here, we plan the next steps." He opened the door and gestured for them to enter. The cabin smelled of old wood and earth, but it was dry, quiet, and safe for the night. Winona sank into a corner, hugging herself, and for the first time allowed the tension to leave her body. Night fell, and Silas kept watch outside, scanning the surrounding hills and valleys. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant sound of wildlife, but no immediate threat approached. Inside, Winona slept lightly, her breathing finally steady, a sign that her small body could rest after days of relentless fear. Silas returned to the cabin as dawn approached. the first light of morning casting soft shadows across the floor. He sat beside Winona, gently waking her. "It's a new day," he said. "We survived the worst. Now we begin the rest." She blinked, still groggy, but understanding his meaning. "The West. It's still dangerous, isn't it?" "Yes," he admitted. "But danger is not the same as defeat. We survived the gorge, the bandits, and the fire before that. We can face what comes next together." The days that followed were filled with quiet work. They repaired the cabin, gathered food from the forest, and Silas taught Winona how to read the land, the signs of water, the tracks of animals, and the subtle warnings hidden in nature. Each lesson strengthened her, not just physically, but emotionally. The fire, the bandits, the gorge, they had not broken her. They had revealed her strength. The injured man, his name was Tokuda, grew stronger too, and he helped with hunting and gathering. In return, he shared stories of his own past, a family lost to disease, a life of wandering, a resilience built over years. His presence reminded Winona that grief did not have to be faced alone, that survival was often about forming bonds with those who cared and could help guide the way. One morning, after a particularly harsh night, Winona stood outside the cabin, looking out over the hills. The sun rose, golden and warm, spilling light across the land. For the first time since the fire, she felt a sense of peace. The West was still vast and wild, but she was no longer a helpless child alone in its cruelty. She had Silas, Tokuda, and now a small measure of hope. Silas joined her, standing quietly at her side. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "The West. It's harsh, yes, but it's also full of possibility. Every day is a choice, fear or courage, despair or hope. You've chosen courage, Winona, and you'll keep choosing it every day." Winona looked up at him, the warmth of his presence grounding her. I think I understand now. Life doesn't stop when you lose everything. It starts over in a new way with those who care and those who survive," Silas said, smiling softly. "And survival is never just about living. It's about growing, learning, and carrying hope forward. You have all of that inside you. Never forget it." The cabin, once abandoned and cold, had become a sanctuary. They laughed quietly over small victories, Dakota catching a rabbit, Winona helping start a fire, Silas teaching her to track deer. Each day was a battle against the wild, against fear, but also a triumph of courage and resilience. Weeks passed, and the three of them formed a small, unlikely family. The land, once harsh and unforgiving, began to feel familiar, even protective. Winona's laughter returned, shy but genuine, and her eyes regained a spark that had seemed lost forever. She told Silas one evening, as they sat by the fire, "I feel safe here, like I belong." "You do belong," he said, voice steady. "You belong wherever you choose to stand. And right now, this is where you stand with us, with hope, with strength." The West had tested them, pushed them to the brink, and shown them loss and danger. But it had also revealed courage, resilience, and the power of human connection. Winona's family had been gone, her life shattered by fire and tragedy. But she had discovered something equally precious: the ability to survive, to trust, and to begin again. As the sun set over the hills, golden light spilling across the cabin and trees, Silas, Winona, and Tokuda sat together, sharing warmth, food, and quiet stories. The shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer defined her. She had survived the fire, the gorge, the bandits, and her own despair. Now she could step into a new life, shaped by courage, connection, and hope. Winona looked up at Silas, gratitude and trust shining in her dark eyes. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. "I'll always stay," he replied. "Not just through storms or danger, but through everything. You're not alone anymore. You never will be." And for the first time in a long time, Winona believed it. She believed in the West, in survival, and in the chance to live again. The fire, the loss, the fear, they were chapters in her story. But the pages ahead were hers too, right? Filled with hope, courage, and the promise of tomorrow. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and rain. The hills glowed gold in the fading light. And the three of them sat together, safe, alive, and ready for whatever the West had in store next. Life would still have trials, but they would face them together, stronger than before. And with hearts full of hope, the ashes of the past remained, but the future was bright. Winona had survived, and in that survival, she had found family, friendship, and the courage to keep moving forward. The West had tested them, but it had also given them a second chance, a chance to live, to grow, and to thrive. And as the stars appeared one by one, sparkling over the vast, endless hills, Winona knew that she was finally home. The story of fire, loss, and survival had led her here to warmth, safety, and a life she could claim as her own. She was ready, at last, to step forward into the light of a new day.